Welcome to the studio review for chapter 23.8, the DOM and events. This is a fun one. We're going to take some existing elements on the page with some starter code from launch code, and we're going to change it so that instead of being just a static page, we make it interactive. So we'll take a look at what it looks like in just a second once we have it running on the local machine. But the first thing you have to do is to fork it from their repository at Launch Code Education to your own account. So use that fork button there. I've already done that part. And then you're going to clone it by getting the link here and then using get clone. So I have forked it. I have it here under my account, Carolista. I've renamed it a little bit because it's a studio review for my purposes. And then I went and got this link here. I opened up a terminal and I navigated into the directory I wanted to be in. So I went to coding, launch code, studio reviews, and code. And then once I was there, I used get clone and the link that I copied from over here, and it cloned it to my local machine. So I have exactly the code that's sitting in this repository now available on my local machine. So I can take a look at that, right? Do a little list and see, I now have this folder. If I go into that folder with a CD, I can see that, it's got the different files, the same ones you see over here that are available. But that's pretty much as I can do here in Terminal. Now I need to go over to VS Code. So I opened DOM and Events Studio Review in VS Code here, and I didn't mean to do that. Let me put it back. And then I can see all these files. I can open them up and look at them. So that you can see that there's an empty scripts file. That's where we're going to be doing our work primarily. They have provided some CSS. They've provided the HTML. And you can see here at the top, they've already linked the CSS file, and they've used the script tab here in the head to link to the script file as well. So that part's already been done. All we have to do is actually write the JavaScript. But they have a number of different elements here. So this really isn't going to make a lot of sense to you unless we actually look at it. So the next step is to run it in the browser. So I'm going to use the live server extension that I have installed here. I'm right clicking on index, opening with live server, and it's been started up at port 5500 at my home address. And you can see that it's a flight simulator. So it's got a status up here at the top, space shuttle ready for takeoff. It's got a trajectory kind of diagram here. This stuff to the left, we're not really going to interact with. That's just there, I guess, to, kind of fill out the page. But we have 3 buttons down here: takeoff, land, and abort mission. We have 4 buttons here: up, down, right, and left. And we also have this readout of the current height. You might think of that as the altitude. That's the term I'm going to use in my code. So we're going to be making all of this interactive. Right now, I can click on the buttons and nothing happens because we have no JavaScript. So we will work on that. So let's see. The last thing that I need to do, you can feel free to code this directly in master. I want to retain my starter code because for the future. So I'm actually going to very quickly here just do a get checkout -b, and I'm going to call this studio review, and I'm going to create a new branch just to code all of this solution into. And I also do already have a solution branch on my repo here. So later, if you want to go and look at all my code, you can just come to my repo and go to that solution here, and it'll take you to the version of the code that actually has all of the solution. Okay, so let's come back to the instructions. The very first thing to do here is to use the window load event to ensure all elements have loaded before attaching event handlers. So we're going to come over to the JavaScript file and say window.add event listener. We'll give it, the first argument is going to be load as a string. That's the event that we want to listen for. And then whenever it triggers, because the event has come to pass, then we need to give it a function to execute. And it's just going to be an anonymous function right here like this. And now everything inside this will be the other things that we want to write to make the page interactive. but we don't make it available to the page until the page is loaded. So that's the purpose of this. Always kind of the first thing you do. So, we still have, we've got this set up now where we can do anything we want to do. So we just need to move on. So if we go to these, you can see numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 all deal with the different buttons on the page. So number 2 is about the takeoff button. 3 is land. 4 is abort mission. So those were the 3 buttons you see down here at the bottom. And then the other 4, up, down, right, and left, of course, are these buttons up here. So we're going to kind of just, introduce this functionality a little bit at a time. And then we get to the bonus missions, we can make it a little fancier. Okay. So number 2, when the takeoff button is clicked, the following should happen. We need a window confirmation to let the user know that we want them to confirm the shuttle's ready. And we can use this message specifically in the confirmation window. And if they click yes, and that returns true, then we want all of this to execute. So we want to have some conditional code here. The flight status should change to shuttle in flight. The background color should change from green to blue. And the shuttle height or altitude should increase by 10,000 miles. Okay, so that's a lot, right? A lot of different things, but it's actually not a lot of code. The very first thing that we need to do is to, everything revolves around this button being clicked, right? So we actually need, an event listener to listen for the click on that button, but we also are going to want to have an object that represents the button element. So the very first thing that I'm going to do here is to use const and say takeoff button. And then I'm just going to go access that by saying document.getElementById and then give it the ID takeoff, which is, you always want to double check exactly what you have in the document. But if we come down here and look at these buttons, you can see that first button does have the ID of takeoff with that text on it. So this is where I'm getting that from. I'm saying, I want you to find the element that has this ID, and that we're going to have an object that represents this button element. So that's what I've just created. This JavaScript variable, this constant, now represents that element in the HTML. This is exactly what a document object model means. Okay, so now that I have a button, I can actually put a listener on it. So I can say, takeoff button dot add event listener, and then remember, just like the one I added up here, first it takes an event. So we'll say click in quotes, and then it takes a function. So we'll just do an anonymous function and define exactly what we want to happen whenever that takeoff button is clicked. So this is where we go back and double check these rules. So the first thing is a confirmation needs to pop up asking asking the user to confirm that the shuttle's ready. So let's, I'm going to make sure I copy this text so we can use this exactly. And I will just use the window confirmation, but it's going to return a Boolean true and false. The window alert does not do this. It just pops something up and they just close it. But if you're using a confirm, that's going to return true or false, which means you need a way to capture that return value. So I'm going to create a Boolean variable called should take off. And I suppose that needs a capital O, but that's fine. Should take off, and we will set that to capture the value. So I'm going to call confirm. You can also do this window.confirm, but it works either way because the browser knows that it is a window method. And so you actually don't have to have the window dot if you don't want. And then I can just put that message in it that I copied from the instructions. And that's it. It should pop up a window and ask the user yes or no. And for now, let's just do a temporary console log to confirm that the value of what's coming back. Is it true or is it false? And let's just test this out. This is the power of doing this, live server in the browser. Of course, it also means that we're going to need to open up our dev tools. And I'm going to switch from the element inspector here over to the console. This is where the JavaScript console is. And so when I click on this button, we should, in theory, see, so I clicked on the button takeoff. We see confirm that the shuttle is ready for takeoff. That's the text that I just put in the code. And I can either say okay or cancel. So I'll say okay. And then we see true came back. So let's say I do it again, and this time I say cancel, we see false come back. Okay, so this is working. It is, popping up this window, giving this text to the user, and then depending on whether they say okay or cancel, it's returning true or false. So we can use that value, and I don't need to log that anymore. That was just temporary. We can use that value to have the conditional behavior following that, because the instructions say here that if the shuttle is ready, then we do parts B through D. So let's set that up. We'll say if should take off. If that's true, then we will have the rest of our code be in here. So let's look at that. The first one says the flight status should change to shuttle in flight. Okay, so if we go back to the page and look, flight status is this section right here. And if I use the element inspector to grab that, you can see this is the P that has the ID of flight status. So that's how we're going to identify it in order to create a JavaScript object that represents this element. So let's do that. And so I think I'm going to start organizing. We're going to end up with a bunch of different objects up here. I'm going to start organizing them. I'm going to have buttons here, and then I'm going to have like areas here that, will represent, like, for instance, this space shuttle, it's flight status, I'm sorry. Flight status equals document dot get element by ID, and then give it flight status, the exact same, whatever this is in the HTML is exactly what we need to use. So it's going to find it by this ID right here. Okay. So now I have an object to work with, so I can actually change some of its properties using JavaScript. So we're saying if the user says, yes, the shuttle's ready for takeoff, then we're going to go to the flight status area and we're going to change something. So let's get a reminder of exactly what that is. It should change to shuttle in flight. I'm going to go ahead and just copy that so we get it verbatim. .enter HTML. That refers to anything that's inside of that element. In this case, it's just text, so that's fine. And we're just going to set that to be this new string. So we can test this again. We can go back now, and I can click this button, and I'll confirm it and say yes. And then we see shuttle in flight right here. It changed as soon as I clicked OK. So this is working. This is good. All right, let's see what the second thing is. The background color of the shuttle flight screen that has the ID of shuttle background should change from green to blue. Okay, so we're going to need another object to represent that background. Let's say document.get element by ID and do shuttle background. And then we can come down here and add another line and say shuttle background dot style dot background color. And remember that if the CSS property is background dash color, all lowercase, then the corresponding property here in this JavaScript object is to use camel case. So we have background and then color with a capital C and no hyphen. That's what you do. You just make it correspond to whatever it was before, but then just anywhere there's a hyphen, just make it camel case instead. All right, so we're going to change that from green to blue. And, they're quite literally just using these named colors for this. So it's going to be very straightforward. We don't need any hex codes or anything like that. All right, again, we're going to test it. So I'm going to hit this button, say OK, shuttle in flight, and the background is blue. Great. Okay. So let's go ahead and do the next one. We have one more thing to do. It says the shuttle height should increase by 10,000 miles. All right, so we can just do this directly by accessing the area that has that text and making sure we just change it from 0 to 10,000. We might manipulate this a little differently later, but this is what we're going to do for now. So again, I need another object. So if I go into here and look at this section, we can see, where is it? Here we go. This is where the height is. The ID is space shuttle height. I'm going to copy that and we'll say const space shuttle height equals document dot get element by ID. And let me use that again. You don't have to have the exact same name here as you do here, but if it works as a JavaScript variable, then go for it. Otherwise, if this is hyphenated, I typically would just do this in camel case to correspond, the same way that you might do it with the CSS properties, which is a good rule of thumb. Okay, so we've got that object now. We can change its properties. So again, this is another one where it's just about the text that's inside of it. So I'm going to say inner HTML, and we're just going to change it to say 10,000. Okay, so let's test it. Takeoff. Okay. All right, shuttle in flight, blue background, 10,000 miles. That's exactly what we wanted to see. Great, so we have successfully taken care of what's going on here with the takeoff button. We're going to move on with these buttons. There's a note here about absolute positioning, and it's really talking about the little tiny rocket thing that we're going to be moving around later. So we actually don't really need to worry about this until we get down here to part 5 and then also the bonus mission. So I'm just going to skip over this for a second, and we'll look at it in more detail later. And then let's go to this one and work on the land button. So it says, when the land button is clicked, a window alert should let the user know the shuttle is landing, the landing gear is engaged. So that's just an alert. We don't need to get any sort of confirmation. We just need to make sure it pops up and then they can clear it. Then the flight status should change to the shuttle has landed. The background color should change back from blue to green, and the height should go back to 0. Okay. So we already have the objects we need for this. So this will go a little faster. So now we need, so keep in mind this entire thing right here, and I will maybe tighten that up a little bit. This entire thing is the listener for the takeoff button. So now we're going to add another listener for the land button, and we do need to create an object for that. So land button equals document.getElementById, and then I just need to double check what the, okay, landing is the ID, so that's what we want to use, landing. And then, it happens, there we go. Now we can create a listener for this button specifically. Click, and then an anonymous function, a semicolon after that. All right, and now we can do the alert. Now, again, we're not capturing anything, so I don't need a variable. I can just go straight to using the alert and just say alert. And let's get the exact text they wanted here. The shuttle is landing, landing gear engaged. So I will set that right in here. And we can test this now. Come over and hit land. The shuttle is landing, landing gear engaged. And I just say, okay, and then it'll move on. So let's do the next part. So we have basically everything that we did before. We just need to give it different values. So the shuttle has landed will be the new value for flight status. So what I really can do here is actually just copy all 3 of these. It's not conditional in this case, it's just going to happen. So I can just put them here. And then I just change the values. So in this case, the shuttle has landed. This one needs to go back to green, and this one needs to go back to 0. That's what they said. So let's try all of this out. Let's go over here. We'll hit the land button. The shuttle is landing. Oh, I guess it's going to be more useful if we take off first. So the background is blue. Now we'll be able to kind of see it change back to green. Okay, land. The shuttle is landing gear engaged. Notice that none of the changes that are about to take place will take place until this alert has been cleared. So as soon as I hit OK, we should see everything change. Yeah, the shuttle has landed, green background, and this has gone back to 0 miles. Okay, so this is working exactly the way it's supposed to. Good. Let's do something similar with abort mission. So we need to create a button for that. And then I need to make sure I've got the right thing. Mission abort is the ID for this. Okay, and now we can create a third listener here for the abort button. I actually meant to call this, let me go back. I meant to call this a abort button, so let's do that. I want to be clear about what this object represents. So abort button dot add event listener, click function semicolon. Okay, so this one says we should use a confirm again, and then these three are actually going to be conditional because they can change their mind and decide that they maybe didn't want to abort it after all. So this is going to look a little bit more like the way this one did, where we have to capture that Boolean true or false first, and then only make changes if that's true. So let's change this to should abort. And then the confirmation message is going to be confirm that you want to abort the mission. So I'm going to come in here and change this out to that message. And then in this case, the flight status should change to mission aborted. The shuttle background should change from blue to green, and the shuttle height should go to 0. Okay, so this is actually exactly the same as these two. And we're starting to have a little bit of redundant code. So you might say, hey, shouldn't we maybe pull that out into a function? And with this little, I'm going to say it's kind of up to you. But later on, when we get into the bonus mission, it might become very obvious that we should do that. So we'll consider it at that time. All right, so we have event listeners on all three of those buttons at the bottom. So now we can kind of go and play around with these. So let's take off and, confirm that we've taken off, and then abort mission. Confirm that you want to abort the mission. If I say cancel, it just stays the same. If I say okay, it changes it back to green, a mission is aborted, etc. This goes back to 0. Okay, so we're working. This is good. Let's see. So now is where it gets a little bit trickier. We want to work with these up, down, right, and left buttons. And the rocket image that's on the page, this little launch code rocket, should actually move in the direction that the button was clicked. And if you click up or down, we should also be changing the altitude by 10,000 miles up or down. So we're going to be affecting kind of a couple of different things. So let's take a look at this. Right now, this thing is kind of like, up here at the top. And my first thought is we probably want to start out on the ground. So we maybe need to set a starting position. And this is where this information up here is going to be helpful. Absolute positioning is something where it bases the location on its parent in the hierarchy of the HTML. And the parent object of this little rocket image is actually the shuttle background object that we've already determined. And so we really just want to set the position using CSS with pixels. And we may have to actually use this parse int in order to convert it to a number. That's one way to go about it. So let's see, I am going to do something first. If I were to try right now to find out what the like position of it was, the browser isn't necessarily going to know, because if I was to only determine what the position of it was with CSS in this file, the JavaScript wouldn't be able to access it from here. And so there's a couple of things we may need to do to actually add some information to the inline styling here that we could add to help with that. So the first thing I can do is on the image itself, I can come in here and give it a position. Oops, excuse me, this should be style. I'm doing inline styling, so style equals. And then I want position absolute. Bottom 0, you have to tell it relative, or yeah, give it the actual position of the within the parent div. And then left would be, and if you wanted it to be in the corner, you could put it just left 0. I actually want it to calculate 50% of the existing width, and then just subtract the 38 pixels to account for the size of the image itself. This is, something that you may not have come up with this, and that's okay. This is, you'll learn how to do these kinds of things as you really get into CSS, if this is the kind of thing you want to do. All right, so let's take a look at this and see if this has changed. Yeah, so now we come over here and we see that the rocket is positioned from the beginning right in the center at the bottom, because I set it that way specifically. And because I did it with inline styling, that means that JavaScript can read that information, and then we can actually operate from there and change its value by saying add 10 pixels or subtract 10 pixels because it has something to go off of. So let's come back over here and take a look at this. Now we could do like we've done up here, if we want to actually start, adding listeners to the button so that we can wire these up to respond and move the shuttle around. We could do it just like this. We could create 4 objects that would represent each button. But there's another way to do this that I'd like to teach you about, an idea called event delegation. So I'm going to say use event delegation for directional buttons. Okay, so the idea here is that instead of creating objects for each one of them, you do a document level. Oh boy, we don't need this .document, but VS Code seems to think that we do. You do a document level event listener for clicking. And then instead of just having a regular anonymous function with no parameters, you actually capture the event when it happens. And then you have access to the information about that event. So for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just add a console log and console log that event so you can see what's behind it, because there's a lot going on there. So remember, this is document level, so I can click anywhere on this page and this thing's going to fire. So let's go over to the console here, and let me just click on anything. Okay, pointer event. Look at all this information, right? There's just tons and tons of information. And we have access to that because JavaScript can actually pull it in, and then we can access it based on this event object. So if I say event.target, then we would see something a little different. So let's come over here and let me click on the abort mission, for example. Oh, well, that's going to do things, but there we go. So notice that it's showing me that event.target is that entire element. It represents it with the HTML. So it knows that when I click this button, it represents this entire element, and that's event.target. So if I wanted to know how to identify it, I could say event.target.id. So now let's do that again. Well, maybe I do it on a button that doesn't have a pop-up. Let's do up. And notice it says up, it says down, and where is that coming from? Those are literally the IDs that are in the file here, up, down, right, and left. So this is kind of how you can use some logic to say, You can click anywhere, but if the ID is this, then do this. If the ID is this, do this. So we're going to use this idea of event delegation with accessing the ID of the target of the event, the click event, to control which direction we're moving the little rocket. All right, so let's take a look at this. I'm going to set it up basically, we don't need the console log anymore. Let's do if event.target.id equals, three of those, left, so we can kind of, do these in any order we want, really. Then, we'll do this. And then we might say, have something similar for the other three. So I'll just copy those down. We'll change it and say, if the ID is right, if the ID is up, if the ID is down. So we can use a single listener that's just listening to the whole document for clicks, and then just have it, only execute certain code depending on which ID it is. And that way, we're using this to identify it without having to actually have an object for it. And in some cases like this, it's, we only need to access little things about it. And so, it's totally fine to do that. Okay. So it tells us, let's just check the directions again. It tells us that we want to move the rocket image 10 pixels in whatever direction it was clicked. For left or right, that's pretty straightforward. So what I need to do then is I need to have some sort of relative positioning, just for the sake of doing the math. So up here at the top, I'm going to declare a couple of variables here. I'm going to say let rocket position X equals 0. So we have a basis, like, the place where we have put it using that inline styling in the HTML. Oops, this should have been Y. There we go. X and Y, just like algebra. Okay, so yeah, we could say that the position that it has currently put it in, because of the CSS we added inline, that's going to be what we consider 0, 0 for our graph, if you think of it that way, as x-axis and y-axis. So from here, we can actually just update that variable and then use that variable to create the CSS we need to change. So for example, with left, I can just say, if we're going left, then the rocket position X needs to subtract by 10. And if it was right, then the rocket position X is going to have 10 added to it. And if we were doing, up, it'll be rocket position Y is increasing by 10. And if we are going down, we will change this to be subtracting by 10. Okay, so that takes care of the math that we're just kind of, tracking what its current position is locally. But as far as actually changing the styling to make it where it changes the position on the page, this is where we access the position with margin left and margin right. So I'm going to go into the rocket. Oh, we have to create the rocket. Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, so I'm just going to create an object for this, call it rocket. Document.getElementById. And in this case, we just need to go and make sure we know what that is. So our image here has an ID of rocket. Well, that's pretty straightforward. Okay, so now we have something we can change. So we have rocket.style.margin left. And we're just going to say that margin now is rocket position X plus pixels. So this enables us to concatenate these together into the string that CSS understands is a proper value for its margin left property as part of the CSS object. So that'll take care of that. And then we'll do something similar here, except for we're going to want to make it, no, it's exactly the same thing, my bad. Yeah, because we've already done the math, it's just about updating it. So it really is just exactly the same thing. And then we use left for the left and right, and we're going to use margin bottom for up and down similarly. So let's go here and I'll paste this, but I'm going to change this to margin bottom. And then we can do the exact same thing here. Okay. So that'll take care of these. Let's go check and see if it works. So we'll check the up button, down button. Okay, right's working, left is working, up and down are not. And I have a mistake here. So this is where we need to make sure that this is actually affecting, it's using this value. And this is the trick with copying and pasting, of course. You have to make sure you actually update everything. So in addition to changing the margin bottom and not the margin left, I also needed to use Y and not X. So let's come over here and try this again. And now up goes up, down goes down, right goes right, and left goes left. Okay, perfect. So that part is working, but we do have this issue where, if we go down, we can go down too far. If we go all the way up, we can actually run it all the way off the page. And that's because we don't really have anything in place that will force it to stay within the bounds. There is no physical resistance here at the edges for this thing naturally. We have to actually code that. And that's part of what the bonus mission is going to do. But there is one more thing in part 5 that we haven't done yet. It says also if the up or down buttons are clicked, the shuttle height should increase or decrease by 10,000 miles. So this is where we actually want to affect this, thing here, the space shuttle height being up or down. So there's a couple of ways to do this. We could use parseInt to actually, find out what it is and then add to that. Or we could create a variable to track it from the beginning and just use our variable to assign it, just like we did with the rocket positions. So I could say let altitude equal 0. And then we could make sure that when we're setting it, we're setting it here. We could say altitude equals 10,000, and then just set this to be altitude. And it'll automatically convert it to a string. It's not a problem for it to be a number here. And then we could do the same thing here. We could change the altitude back to 0 and set this to be altitude and change, I'm gonna grab that, replace this. And here again, we've got some duplicated code, but we'll deal with it in a second. And now for these, I can just do the same thing. I can say, if we're going up, increase the altitude from whatever it currently is, and just, oh goodness, there we go, add 10,000 to it. And then we'll say, shuttle background, no, space shuttle height dot inner HTML should now be whatever the new value of altitude is after it's been altered. And we'll do the same thing here, but we'll subtract instead of adding. Okay, so let's try this. We come over here, we hit up. Yeah, and every time we hit up, we've got it going, by 10,000 and then decreasing by 10,000. Perfect. Okay. So now we have a way to, have some math that's keeping track of things for us, and then, altering things according to which buttons are pushed using this event delegation. And so the last thing is to do the bonus mission. So if you have finished this, there are additional things you can do. The first one is to keep the rocket from flying off the background. And this is going to take a little bit of extra work, of course. The first thing we can do is take a look at what happens when we get to the top. So if we get to the top here and we kind of hit the roof, as it were, we are at 250,000 miles at that point. It took 25 clicks to get all the way up there. So we can use that to our advantage because we know this is a set height. So we can just add to our logic here to prevent any of this from firing if in fact we've hit that limit. So like here, we're saying we want this stuff to happen. We want it to go up unless something else is true. So we want to say if the altitude is less than 250,000, then we will allow it to execute this code and continue to change the rocket position and the altitude. Otherwise, it's not going to execute this, so it should stay put. So let's test that theory. We can hit up 25 times and see if it'll let us do the 26th. Nope, there we go. So I'm hitting up multiple times and it stopped. So that was it. Just a little bit of logic was all we needed. And then we can do the same thing here by saying, as long as the altitude is greater than 0, then, sure, you can move it back down. And so now when we hit the down button, it's not going anywhere. It can go up, I can bring it back down, but then it won't let me go any further. Okay, so up and down are pretty easy. Left and right is where it gets a little trickier. For one thing, the width of this is variable because that's the way that launch code said it. So unless you change it to be a constant width and then have some sort of math to deal with it that way with some, set numbers, you can actually deal with this screen width thing by taking advantage of the window object. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to create a variable for us to use to do some math. And it's going to be called background width so that we can find out what that current width is, no matter what size the window is. And this is where I'm going to use the parse int in this case, because I need to separate out the number from the width property. So it's going to give me the number without the pixels. So I'll say window.getComputedStyle, and then I'm going to go to the shuttle background and get that computed style, and then say .getPropertyValue, and then the one that I want, it's the width. All right, so this allows you to tap into that window object and say, go compute what you know about the shuttle background and give me that width. Now, right now, I'm gonna, oops. All right, let's console log this. And right now, this is just gonna, anywhere I click, because this is a document level listener, I'm going to get this. But I wanna see what it's gonna give me. In fact, I'm gonna add a word in front of it. Background width is, and then comma, and then I'll log these together. Okay, so we've got our console. I'm gonna click, background width is 461. If I change it, now it's going to measure it again. Background width is 384. So we have access to that number, and that means we can do some math based on that, which is great. So all we need to do here is add some similar logic to prevent it from moving off the left or off the right. So I'm going to say, as long as if the target ID is left, if it's the left button, and the rocket position X is greater than, and this is where we do the math, background width divided by 2 minus 40, just to account for the size of the image. There we go. So as long as that rocket position is greater than that position, whatever this number is, then we will allow it to continue to move. So let's test this out. I'm going to hit left. Ooh, it's not moving. Oh, it's this is meant to be negative, of course. Okay. Yeah, I need it to be negative because relative to here, it's going, to the left. Okay, there we go. Okay, and yeah, you see, I'm still pressing left over and over again, and it's not going any further. So now we need to do the same thing on the right side, and it is going to be, exactly what I had, but without the negative sign. There we go. Okay, so let's test this out. We hit right. Ooh, did I do it again? Did I screw it up again? Yeah, should be less than. Copy and paste, guys. It gets you every time. All right. Okay, so now we check it. Right. And yeah, so I can, no matter what I press, it's forcing this to stay within the bounds. So that's the first part of the bonus mission. Keep the rocket from flying off the background. The next part says return the rocket to its original position on the background when it's been landed or when the mission was aborted. And that makes sense, right? Because if you were messing around with this and you said, take off and okay, and then shuttle's in flight and it, you go up, you go, down. If you abort the mission right now, it might change this back to 0 because we already took care of that, but it has not moved the rocket. The rocket's still in place. We want the rocket to go back to where it was supposed to be. So let's add some functionality for that. And I also am going to take out this console log now. Here we go. Okay, so when we abort or when we land, we have 2 different listeners here for those instances. Right now, we are resetting the altitude and changing it on the page, but we are not resetting the rocket stuff. So this is where I kind of say, okay, well, if we're going to be adding a lot more information here, then maybe we want to actually, start pulling this out. But let's just look at what we need to add first. Spatial height HTML is 0, green, altitude. Yeah, so we would want to change the positions. We just want to reset everything back to 0. So we would say rocket position X is 0, rocket position Y is 0. And then we would also want to change the actual position on the page, not just the math, the math we're tracking behind the scenes. We actually need to go in and say, we want the margin left to be rocket position X plus pixels, now that we've changed it back to 0. And then same thing here with bottom and rocket position Y. Okay. So now I could copy and paste this and add this here. But now we have, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of code that we would have duplicated in these 2 different listeners here. So I'm going to remove it, and I'm going to create down here at the very bottom, I'm going to create a utility function that's going to say, reset rocket. Maybe not so much a utility function, it's just a helper function. I say that just because I consider a utility function something like, getting a random number. This is more specific than that. We need this, by the way, if you had a true utility function that didn't depend on any of the objects, like shuttle background, you could put it outside the load listener. You could put it way down here. But we actually need this to be here because it needs to be in scope of all of these objects we've created so that it has access to them and can change their properties. So I'm just putting it below all the listeners down here at the bottom, but it's going to actually, be able to access the rocket and access the space shuttle height and these, things we have here for the math. So I've got that now. So I can just call this from both of these places now and say, when we land, do the specific stuff, the alert, the flight status is very specific. And now just do all the stuff that's shared by saying, reset rocket. And then I can do the same thing here, take care of this. The only thing that really is unique to aborting here is the message for flight status. And then everything after that is exactly the same. So we'll just call reset rocket in both places. So let's test this out. I can take off, say, okay, I can go up, I can go, left, maybe up some more. And then if I land, boom, it puts it back here at the bottom. Same thing if I guess I should take off so we change the background color. Right, up some more, and I abort the mission. Boom, it resets it back to 0. Okay, great. The only other thing that I think I would like to add, kind of along these same lines, is when we take off, it would be kind of nice if we also moved our rocket upward a little bit here. So, maybe we could also have just a couple more lines of code here where we could say, rocket position Y can increase by 10, and we can set the style of margin bottom to be that new position plus pixels. We always have to add that on for the CSS because it's not going to know. If you give it just the number, it doesn't know what measurement you're referring to. So the CSS needs the pixels on the end. All right, so let's try that out. So if we take off and confirm, yes, we want to take off. There we go. It pushes it up. This updates here. We have it pushed up, and then also behind the scenes, that means that it's, tracking that position as 10 pixels or just 10. Yeah, here. Okay, so I think that's everything. Certainly let me know if you're in my cohort. You can let me know in the lecture questions channel in Slack if you have any questions about anything I've done here. But this is fun, there's lots of other things you could do here. You could add logic about the fuel levels and astronaut chat. You could make it where it doesn't let you land or abort mission unless you've already taken off. You could have some way of tracking that. Yeah, and make sure you can't do up, down, right, and left unless you have taken off or things like that. Lots of other ways to make this even more interactive and more interesting. So I recommend you play around with it. You could, play around with the styling too. You could change the Times New Roman and use different fonts and different colors. So, go wild, go crazy. Use this as a practice opportunity because we'll be doing a lot more work, and graded assignment number 5 in particular, you're going to be doing very similar things to this, manipulating things in the DOM to make the page interactive. So it'll be really good practice. All right, that's it. Hope you have a great time with this, and I'll see you in the next one.